be starting our program now, so once you're out of line for the delicious food here at Italy, please take a seat. We have plenty of seating still up here in the front and off to the side, so keep that in mind as you're trying to come in here. My name is Stephanie Lucas, and I'm the Deputy Director of Horticulture and Operations here at Madison Square Park Conservancy. It's my great pleasure to welcome you all here this morning. The Madison Square Park Conservancy is licensed by the City of New York, and we raise 100% of the funds necessary to keep the park clean, green, safe, and active for our 60,000 visitors that we have every day. We'd like to take this opportunity to thank our fabulous program sponsor, Italy, for graciously hosting us today and for always being supportive of our organization. I'd also like to thank our Mad Square Hort sponsors. We have Credit Suisse, Con Edison, the Columbia Property Trust, and the New York City Department of Parks and Recreation. In 2015, the Board of Directors adopted a strategic plan that put the art and horticulture programs at the core of what we do at the Conservancy. The power of the plan enabled us to commit more time, energy, and dollars to our horticulture program. Over the past 4 years, we've become a registered American public garden, and importantly, a level 1 arboretum. I want to thank you all for coming here today to discuss a topic that is not discussed enough in the field of public horticulture and generally in the United States. For those of you who know me, you might have heard me tell a story of my undergraduate degree, starting as a pharmacy student at the University of Connecticut. Growing up, someone close to me had developed untreated chronic depression and was suicidal. Soon after her death, I found myself a freshman in college, struggling to cope with her loss and understanding the impact that her lack of treatment had on me. I myself was depressed, and my grades were showing it. I would often study outside the pharmacy building in a secluded garden, which just happened to be situated right next to the biology greenhouses on campus. There I'd sit under the campus's single giant sequoia and pull off its funny-looking immature cones. I quickly realized I knew very little about these trees, and I often wondered, why do these trees look nothing like they do on the West Coast? This small 20-foot tree was nothing like the giant redwoods out there. This eventually led me to ask some questions. I went to the greenhouse and I talked to the greenhouse staff there. They informed me that there was an entire field of people who studied horticulture, who designed gardens, and thought about these spaces as places for therapy and healing. I quickly changed my major and I found my calling. Designing gardens was indeed therapeutic. I could sit there and imagine a million spaces that people could sit and relax in and feel refreshed. My studies also included practical classes. We dug holes, we got dirty, we went outside, and I felt more connected with nature than I ever had. Horticulture helped me. In my tenure of working in the green industry, I've seen more and more people like me who have explored careers in public green spaces as a respite from mental illness, trauma, and the burdens of poverty. 1 in 5 adults, 19.1% of Americans, experience mental illness each year, and these numbers are on the rise. It can be easy for all of us who work and design gardens to get lost in the weeds of our day-to-day life. But I urge everyone here to realize that what we do as public green space advocates and managers that know that we're providing a public service to people who just want a place to relax and renew themselves. I urge everyone here today to share what brings you joy in your green spaces to your friends, your coworkers, and people you see every day. Our gardens are places of healing where we can connect with others in our environments. We should strive to be an industry that will lead and listen to the next generation as our world becomes more disorganized and chaotic. People are reaching out to us to connect to our natural world. I personally believe that the denial of climate change directly correlates with people's disconnect with nature. Everyone in the industry has heard of plant blindness, but isn't weather blindness also a chronic problem? Our lack of exposure to the outdoors in an urban environment makes us easy all to fall out of natural rhythms essential to our mental and physical health. Today's symposium will speak to why public green spaces are therapeutic and what we can do to further engage our patrons, how we are part of a living system that many of us have lost touch with. That being said, it is my pleasure to introduce Naomi. Naomi Sachs is an assistant professor in the Department of Plant Science and Landscape Architecture at the University of Maryland. She is the founding director of the Therapeutic Landscapes Network and a co-editor of the Health, Environments Research and Design Journal. Naomi earned a PhD in architecture at Texas A&M University and a Master of Landscape Architecture from UC Berkeley. She has published and presented nationally and internationally in the positive role of nature in human health. Among other publications, Naomi is co-authored with Claire Cooper Marcus of the book Therapeutic Landscapes, an evidence-based approach to designing and healing gardens with restorative outdoor. Today, Naomi will speak on restorative landscapes, the evidence behind what you've known along. Welcome, Naomi.
Good morning. Oh, hi, Liz. Okay, great. Just going to move this up a little bit. Okay, you can all hear me? Oh, it's great to be here. Thank you to the Madison Square Park Conservancy for hosting this event and for inviting me to speak at it. I'm thrilled to be here. And I'm going to move this up just a little bit more. No? Oh, I just turned it off. Hello? Yeah, okay. So yeah, as Stephanie said, I'm going to be talking about a little bit of the research behind what everyone in this room has known all along, what we feel, but what still sometimes needs some research backing behind it. A little bit about me and my background. I got a degree in women's studies as my Bachelor of Arts, and what do you do when you have a Bachelor in Women's Studies? You work in a coffee shop and you do various part-time jobs. And you work for a garden designer because the photographer you're working for doesn't have enough work for you. And I was also renting a house, and I found that when I was working in the garden, digging in the dirt, I felt better. No matter what kind of a horrible day I'd had, I felt better. And then I started learning about landscape architecture, and I came across a issue of Landscape Architecture magazine that was on healing gardens. And I'd never heard of this before, but the light bulb went off. And I thought, okay, I can still do something creative and make my parents happy by earning a living, maybe, and do something that still helps people as well. So I went to UC Berkeley for my Master of Landscape Architecture and chose Berkeley because that's where Claire Cooper Marcus, now my fellow co-author and mentor, was. And right around the time that I graduated, I founded the Therapeutic Landscapes Network. And the mission of the TLN, which has been around since 1999, is to connect people with information and other people and nature. And I have some cards up here on the TLN, and there's also the URL is healinglandscapes.org. So I've been interested particularly in healthcare design and providing access to nature in healthcare, because a lot of hospitals still to this day look like this. And that's very disturbing. Hospitals serve, does this keep cutting out, or is that, no? Okay, I just keep cutting out. So hospitals serve basically everyone at some point or another, and they're incredibly stressful places to be. And people are at their most vulnerable, whether they're patients or visitors, and also staff who are serving those patients and visitors. They often look like this, but they can look like this. They can be beautiful, restorative places of healing that provide hope rather than just the basic accommodations. So when I was thinking about giving this talk, I was thinking about the audience, and as part of the Therapeutic Landscapes Network, we have a Facebook page. And a lot of times the things that I post, the responses that I get are, duh, I've known that my whole life. What do I need research to tell me that? But research is good in letting people know about the science, and it's also really important for finding funding for things like school gardens and hospital gardens and grant funding so that the Madison Square Park can still function. So we need evidence behind what we think is just intuitive. That's interesting. Okay. So there is a lot of good research out there and I'm sorry that the font is so small. I'm not quite sure how that happened. Hopefully it's not that case with all the slides. I'm also happy to send people a PDF of this presentation afterwards because there are a lot of good citations in it. So passive and active connection with nature does lots of good things. It reduces stress and depression and anxiety and even pain. It improves mood and well-being, creativity, cognitive function, and it promotes exercise and social connectedness and altruism, environmental stewardship. Oh, yep, it's the same with all the slides. All right, I apologize. So let's start with a couple definitions. The first is health. And I love this definition by the World Health Organization, and this was way back in 1948. These guys were very forward thinking. It's that health is not just not being sick. It's a holistic point of view where health is also about the physical and emotional and perhaps even spiritual well-being. And landscapes for health, or restorative landscapes. We have a beautiful example right across the street. And here are some images from that. I lived for a year in New York City and just like 2 blocks away. And so this was my park that I went to all the time and walked my dogs and enjoyed the space. So a restorative landscape is any landscape, outdoors usually, but it can also be indoors, large or small, wild or designed, that promotes human health and well-being. And so it could be a fire escape, it could be a memorial, it could be a giant national park, it could be a farm or a community garden, it could even be an indoor space, in a hospital, in a school, in an office building. Even here is an example of biophilic design. So let's get to some of the hardcore research. Roger Ulrich in 1984 published a study in Science, a very reputable journal. He did a study of gallbladder patients who were recovering from surgery. And about half of those patients had a view of a brick wall, and the other half of the patients had a view of some trees, nothing, super fancy. But he was able to look at the patient medical records and find the only thing really that those patients had different was the view that they looked out on. Can you guess what he found? Was there any statistically significant difference? Well, yes, there was. So he found that those patients who had a view out of the window had fewer negative nurse notes, so they were better patients. They complained less. They also needed less pain medication during their stay. And most importantly, they got out of the hospital almost a full day sooner. And this was back at a time when, after gallbladder surgery, people were staying in the hospital for, as you can see, over 8 days, right? 8 to 9 to 10 days. Now it's probably, keyhole surgery that takes, you're in and out after one night. Now, some of you are probably thinking why this makes sense. It makes sense because, first of all, it's actual empirical evidence that nature is restorative, even just a view of nature. It is also, every single one of these points speaks to the healthcare organization's bottom line. So happier nurses mean less turnover, and less pain medication means less medication that the hospital has to pay for. Shorter patient stays, hospitals make their money from beds. And so getting people out of the hospital is a great way to save them money. So now we talk not only about patients and how they benefit from interaction with and views of nature, but also the families, the visitors, and the staff, and also the healthcare organization as a whole. So we talk about enhanced patient health as well as satisfaction. How satisfied are people with that experience? Healthcare facilities are very competitive now. Most people have the option, unless they're in a very rural environment, of going to more than one place. So how are they going to have a competitive advantage? One way is by providing natural light, beautiful spaces, and access to nature. I'll talk about some research where there are implications for enhanced safety. It's also a good marketing and PR, right? We care about you, we care about the earth, we care about the community in all of these different ways. Also, if you have a beautiful rooftop garden, it's a great place to hold fundraising events and wow your board, and so it's this multifunctional. So it really helps the healthcare organization's bottom line. And even if you're not thinking about healthcare, you could be thinking of an office space or a restaurant or a school. So there are many applications. My focus happens to be in healthcare, but you can think about other areas as well. So there have been some studies where people, in addition to patients, are looking out and being restored. One, back in 2008, they found that nurses who had a view out the window were less stressed, both with chronic and acute stress, and had increased alertness. And so this gets back to the safety. You can imagine with dealing with meds and taking care of patients, that increased alertness and less stress would be very important. With prisoners, and in the criminal justice system, there were fewer calls with prisoners who had views out of windows. And there's been some really interesting research about access to nature and contact with nature in the criminal justice system. And sometimes you can't get outside. Sometimes you can't even look out a window. And so there's been a lot of research about what happens when people just look at pictures of nature. And even then, researchers have found a positive impact. So one study found that even just looking at pictures, people were more pro-social. They were more willing to help someone in need. They were more community-minded. Some theoretical foundations. One is biophilia. So Eric Fromm was actually the person who coined the term biophilia, bio meaning life, and philia meaning attraction. And this goes to our innate attraction to life and living things. And this is a picture of Richard Louv, who founded the Children in Nature Network and wrote Last Child in the Woods and the Nature Principle. So we love living things. Another theory was by Stephen and Rachel Kaplan at the University of Michigan, the attention restoration theory. And this is that when we are hard at work, on the computer, or walking down the street, trying not to get run over by a bicycle or someone on their cell phone who's not looking around, that takes directed attention, and it's very tiring. And when we're in nature, or we see pictures of nature, we see a butterfly, we feel the breeze, that's called soft fascination. And that kind of involuntary attention restores our directed attention fatigue. Back. Huh. Okay. Oh yeah, all right. So there have been some great studies that have looked at attention restoration theory and the benefits. So one of is the cognitive benefits. And you can think of, for example, with schools and offices, how important this is for people to be able to be focused on a particular task. There's been some really interesting research recently on creativity and how connection with nature also improves creativity. Ming Kuo and Andrea Faber-Taylor did a study on children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and found that even as little as 20 minutes in a park, the children's symptoms improved about as much as if they were taking Ritalin, basically. a more recent study by Greg Bratman, who's now at the University of Washington, found that people had fewer ruminative thoughts when they were in a natural setting versus an urban setting. He had different cohorts walk in two different places. Rumination is like what cows do when they chew their cud, and we do the same thing when someone says something and we're like, oh, why'd they say that? And they probably didn't mean anything, but we just ruminate. So we found that being in nature restored us and made us have fewer ruminative thoughts than when people were walking in urban environments. So another theory that relates to this is stress reduction theory. This is by Roger Ulrich, the same guy who did the view through a window study. And this is a little bit more physiological, that features in the environment that reduce stress restore us, because stress is incredibly harmful to us and exacerbates most other negative conditions that people have, physical and mental. So reduced stress comes through safety and security and comfort, through having a sense of choice and control, through social connection, physical movement and exercise, and finally through, of course, the most important, positive distraction with nature and with other living things. So that's why therapy dogs and working with dogs and cats and horses is so important. That's another aspect of biophilia. So some recent research in 2019, there's this question of nature dosage. What kind of nature and how much nature do people need? And they found that even as little as 20 to 30 minutes a day in nature 3 times a week was enough to see some positive benefits of time in nature. And sometimes we need even fewer than 20 to 30 minutes. So green exercise is exercise outdoors in a naturalistic environment, and even as little as 5 minutes of green exercise, these little micro breaks, can have a very positive effect. When it's really bad weather out, or we're too sick to go outside, or we're stuck in the office, fortunately, we don't have to go for a walk outside. We can just be near nature. So there's been fantastic research on improvement in girls' test scores. This was a series of research by Faber-Taylor and Kuo and Sullivan at Illinois Champaign-Urbana, where they looked at the various different health benefits. So easing the burden of poverty, reducing domestic violence, curbing crime, which is very important, and improving girls' test scores. And we don't even have to enjoy it. It's great if we do enjoy it, but a study by Berman, Genoides, and Kaplan found that even in really cold, horrible, miserable weather, people were still getting some benefits from being outside and walking in nature. So some possible pathways. How does this work? So we know that it works, right? We know that nature is restorative, but how? And there's been a lot of good research recently, and this is one of the things that I'm particularly interested in. So one of those potential pathways is sunlight and vitamin D. Sunlight produces vitamin D or stimulates vitamin D in us, and that's very important for elderly people whose bone strength starts to go. But is important for children too. Children are now getting rickets again because they're not getting outside. And so sunlight is very important. Daylight as well, even if it's not sunny out, that improves and restores and keeps our circadian rhythms in balance, and is especially important for people with stress and mental health issues. And so there's been a lot of really good research about the importance of daylight. But sunlight isn't the only thing, and daylight, otherwise we could just walk around in a parking lot and be great. So what else is it? It's a multi-sensory group of elements that provides this restoration from nature. And one that Amos Clifford will be talking about is forest bathing. So the research around forest bathing, they have found that the volatile organic compounds in some forests, these phytoncides, they're a lot more, they're much higher concentration in forests, and they did most of their research in Japan and Korea so far, than in urban environments. And so pine scent and cedar scent, for example, increase memory and vigor, and also reduce confusion and blood pressure and the negative aspects. Even if we don't have pine scent, if there are plants, there is more oxygen and less carbon dioxide. And you can see here, the blue is cooler and the red is the hottest. And so plants, trees and other plants reduce the heat island effect. And as with climate change, that's going to get more and more important to have plants. Being near water, water creates negative ions. And negative ions stimulates the good stuff, the happy hormones, and reduces the negative, like serotonin. There's also some really interesting research about dirt, about at least one bacterium in the soil, Microbacterium vaccae, that at least in mice, we don't know how much dirt people have to absorb or consume before they get these benefits yet, but at least in mice, it's been found to stimulate serotonin, and that reduces stress and improves cognitive function. So those of you who really like working in the dirt, perhaps you can sign up for a clinical trial. Or just enlist your kids, because they're probably digging in the dirt already anyway. So there are a few, I work on this research all of the time, and now teaching at University of Maryland, I'm talking all the time with my colleagues and my students about the benefits of nature, and I've only been there, I'm actually an assistant, not an associate professor. Still on the tenure track. But I see all of these very exciting and encouraging trends. And so there are so many, and I'm just going to share a few with you. So one is that, and this actually came from one of Gwen's and my colleagues. We both teach at the Chicago Botanic Garden. And here is the healing power of nature on NBC. So a news segment, and you can really tell that something has entered the mainstream when it's on one of these major news segments. So that's encouraging to me, because usually if it's something like that, then people are paying attention and there's funding behind it, and that funding goes to more research, and it goes to school gardens and more parks and so on and so forth. There's also, I'm very encouraged that there's more of a focus now on equity, diversity, and inclusion, and environmental justice. So how is providing access to nature, how does it benefit everyone? And how can we make it benefit everyone? And there's been some research that people in disadvantaged communities actually benefit more. Kind of the more that you need nature and are deprived of it, the more you benefit from it when you do have that access. And so I'm on Instagram, and every time that I go on, I love seeing all of these different sort of ad hoc groups. And some of them, like Outdoor Afro, are they've got great membership, and they're like major nonprofit organizations. So RUMAP with Outdoor Afro, Diversify Outdoors is a 501c3 nonprofit organization. But a lot of these are just single people or small groups of people who said, hey, let's post on Instagram, and let's be, I'm Nature Chola, and I'm Outdoor Asian, and I'm Corazon Latino, actually they're a 501c3, Queer Nature, and she's dope too, Seniors Outdoors. And so it's very exciting to see all of these groups and people saying, we're in nature too. Nature's not just for like middle-class white folk. It's for everyone, and we have a right to be here. And one of my colleagues at Cornell, I was a postdoc at Cornell before going to University of Maryland, he just got a grant looking at what are the barriers to people getting out in nature, and how can we overcome those barriers. So I'm very excited that people from the Black Farmers and Urban Growers Network are here, and that we'll be hearing from them. And then forest bathing, and Clifford Amos will be talking. So this has also been getting a lot of press. There's something that's just, people are really connecting with it. And sometimes people maybe don't even know why, but the press has really taken this up. And I think there are many people here who are part of the forest bathing network. And related to that is the Park RX America, which is an idea of getting doctors to actually prescribe time in nature for patients. And this was started, well, it was started in Australia, but was popularized by Robert Zarr, who is in Washington, D.C. He's a pediatrician and actually got park prescriptions and nature prescriptions into the electronic medical records. So his doctors at Unity Health can enter prescriptions to go outside for this amount of time into the medical records. And as part of that, they started a database of the various parks all around DC, so that someone would say, well, I want to go play basketball, or I want to play soccer, or I want to just hang out with my dog. Where can I go? And that's been happening now all over the country. And as part of that, this began at Cornell. There's now campus RX, Nature RX. So stress on college campuses is at an all-time high. Stress, anxiety, depression. And so people, the campus healthcare has been looking at non-pharmacological approaches to dealing with stress. And students are very open to how can I manage my stress without taking Zoloft or on top of it if that's not really doing enough. So University of Maryland, it also now has a Park RX or Nature RX program, as well as many other schools. And it seems like every week another school contacts us and says, hey, we want to do a Nature RX, Campus Nature RX program as well. So stay tuned because that's really taking off. And then back to healthcare. It's very encouraging to see programs like Kaiser Permanente, and Unity Health. Well, of course, there's horticultural therapy. And I actually don't have a slide for hort therapy because to me it's not a trend. It's been around for so long, and Gwen will talk about this. So horticultural therapy is something that has been here. It's akin to physical and occupational therapy. And it's people working with plants as another treatment modality. So another thing that healthcare facilities have been doing recently is trying to provide access to nature through gardens, through parks, through connecting with communities, and if it's a new facility, building it across from a park or connecting it with a park. And also holding farmers markets, nutrition programs. So it's this forward-thinking, looking at the World Health Organization's definition of health and how can we connect with the community? How can we look at the upstream determinants of health and keep people healthy rather than waiting till they're sick and dying before they walk through the doors. So that is it. And I didn't see the flag waving, so I'm either ahead of time or I just didn't see it. And I think we're going to wait till after Gwen and I both go to have questions. But this is my email, and I would love to talk with you if you're more interested in the research. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Naomi. Let me move that. Good morning, everyone. My name is Stephanie Stachow. I'm the Senior Park Manager here at Madison Square Park Conservancy. And it's my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Gwen Fried. Gwen Fried is a manager of horticultural therapy services at New York University Langone Medical Center. She has more than 20 years of experience in development, implementation, and management of horticulture therapy programs and design of therapeutic gardens. She is a faculty member in Chicago Botanic Gardens Healthcare Garden Design Seminar, vice president of the board of directors for the Mid-Atlantic Horticultural Therapy Network, and a board member of Metro Hort Group. She lectures internationally and has co-authored books and papers, including the new textbook, The Profession and Practice of Horticultural Therapy, published this year. Today, Gwen will speak on therapeutic horticultural programs in public spaces.
Hi, everybody. Okay, so we're gonna start. I have okay. This is my contact information. You can email me at any time. I am located on 17th Street, so I didn't come very far today, but I'm more than happy to chat with any of you about the subject. So we're going to really look at how we can bring horticulture, therapeutic horticulture programs into our parks here in New York City. And there are a lot of programs already going on, little programs in this park, run by this park, but I want to kind of look at the whole picture and find a way that you might be able to take some of this back with you. So what we're going to do today, we're going to define what therapeutic horticulture is, list some groups who could benefit from it, list affordances that make the space therapeutic, see examples of places that have programming going on right now, and discuss how to bring that back to your park, to your community. So, I have two definitions up here. The first, the bolden one, is a definition of therapeutic horticulture, a program of nature-based activities to facilitate improved well-being through active or passive participation. Individual goals do not have to be defined. And I just wanted people to understand, because very often people use the term horticultural therapy and therapeutic horticulture as one and the same. And then you get into people saying, well, you can't call it therapy because you're not a clinician or something like that. Horticultural therapy is the engagement of a person in a nature-based activity facilitated by a trained therapist, and that's kind of the difference. And there are going to be measurable goals in horticultural therapy. Most people who work in the field of horticultural therapy do more therapeutic horticulture. It's just because that's the nature of the beast. So who can benefit from this programming? And from everything Naomi said, we know that we all can benefit from any kind of exposure to nature. But the idea is, if we're going to bring programming into public spaces, we have to target certain groups or certain groups of people. And kind of thinking about who might benefit would be a good place to start. So I always think of kids first, and especially special needs children, because special needs children, their families are dealing with so much more than everyday families of kids that go off to school and come home and then they can go to the park, and the caregivers or the parents can sit on a bench and watch their children play. Special needs children often have a lot of medical appointments. There's a higher level of care involved. There's worrying about what society will say when the child acts out and the child looks like they are too old to be acting the way they're acting. There's a lot more awareness of this now, but it still happens all the time, where I'll see a child on a bus who, I guess because of my years of training, I realize this child is definitely autistic. The child starts acting out, and you just look at the scouring faces of people who are probably thinking, why can't that person control that child? So that stigma is still there, and it often causes people, families, not to bring their children into public spaces, and therefore they're not able, especially in an urban environment like this, they're not taking advantage of what's right there for them. So if we look at physical disability, we're talking about maybe CP, muscular dystrophy, kids who have physical limitations, whether wheelchair or they walk with a device or they just need a handheld assist all the time. Developmental, again, could be CP as well, but you're looking at Down syndrome and autism spectrum disorder, all of those. Behavioral and emotional are like processing disorders. There's something called sensory integration disorder, where children can't regulate unless they can get out and move and kind of get their bodies swinging back and forth. Swings. You know, we'll actually help these children regulate and get themselves back into where they can tolerate school or less movement activities. ADD falls into that realm. And then sensory impaired. And sensory impaired, we're talking about, without other things, is really either blindness or visual impairment or deafness or hard of hearing. So we have all of these populations of special needs children that could benefit. Then we talk about adults. And we know, I know I'm speaking to the choir here, all of you get it, but the amount of stress that is in our lives, and I have my own definition of stress. Stress is the perception of lack of control. So if you feel like you don't have control of a situation, you're stressed by it. If you can pull out of that situation the things you have control over, it becomes a less stressful situation. Being able to go and think, chew your cud, as Naomi said, in a park, where you have the added environmental factors of good brain chemistry working towards you will help reduce stress. And then we look at obesity, and we talk about the obesity epidemic. I mean, I walked through here, I think breathing downstairs, I probably absorbed 1,500 calories. So, I mean, there's so many temptations and so much less opportunity for exercise that just looking at people who are morbidly obese and looking for solutions, that programs that entice them to come into a park without other, that there's always that kind of, I don't want to go in a gym, people see me, just walking through a park. This is a very busy city. Nobody looks at anybody. We have the best environment. For us to notice, I know for me, to notice someone strange in the park, they have to be really, really, really unique. I will say that. Because I'll bring friends from out of town and we'll walk through the park and they'll be, did you see that? And I'll just be like, I have great observation skills, and no. So, I think, just being able to have a safe place where nobody notices you works for that. There's a huge chronic pain population. These are people who have very hard to manage pain, often back pain, but not always. And now with the opioid epidemic, and people, medical professionals being cognizant of this, they're also getting less pain medication. So having programs that are able to help these people find other ways to manage their pain by maybe just passive sitting in a park or being in nature, and we'll talk about forest bathing later. All of these things would work to their advantage. So we have opportunities. We just have to find them, because you have to let them know you're there. The parks are there. The parks have been here since the 1800s, and they're getting renovated and they're getting new looks. And we can look at this and we can target those around us that maybe could use the help. Cancer patients, there's cancer centers all over Manhattan. Parks lend themselves to this, again, because people in cancer treatment often have to wait. They often have to come in and get blood levels drawn before they can see if they can get their treatments. Talk about stressful. It's bad enough you have to go through chemo, but then to know that you have to get tested to see if the chemo can even be administered, and that's what saves your life. Very, very stressful. And then differently abled people. And I work in a rehab hospital, and I work with people all the time that are newly or more disabled than they were probably 6 weeks before. And all of the therapies have to talk about what doesn't work. We got to get your leg working. Your leg's not working right. We got to get that arm moving. I look at people and say, so what works? What are we using here? What are the tools we have? And that's something you can do with gardening. Find what works for people, the parts that work, and work with those. People And this is probably the biggest population of people who could benefit from what we have to offer in New York City parks or other parks in the area. People living with and recovering from mental illness. Ecosystem changes, rapid urbanization of environments, and the difference in the health care that's available to the mental health, the mental illness patients is incredible. You know, there's such a stigma that goes with mental health. My mother would never have gone to a psychiatrist. She could have been in the depths of depression. She dealt with chronic illness. To her, she would deal with anything rather than go to a psychiatrist. She came from that era where you weren't crazy, so you didn't go to a psychiatrist. You know, now people are more open to seeing mental health professionals, but for a lot of our population, those services are too expensive. They're only minimally covered by insurance. You only get 6 visits, really, and then you're cured. I mean, you know, that's not how it really works. But that's how, you know, managed healthcare thinks it's best for them to afford. So we have this great large group of people, and it goes from the most elite to people in the homeless population and living in the shelter system, and all can benefit from this. People living with depression, having anxiety. Think about how nice a green, safe space feels when you're just marginally anxious about something. So think about someone who has anxiety all the time, when even, you know, social anxiety, when even little things, you know, I can't be out with that many people. You know, having some of the larger parks, Inwood Park, where there's tons of space, you know, being able to go to a space like that is so incredibly healing. And then mental illness, you know, whether you're talking about, you know, borderline personality, all of the mental illness diagnosis, people will get treatment and they will get medicated, but they need to recover. It's not like, oh, we'll give you this pill and now you're better. You know, they have to learn how to live with that mental illness. And just like pain with mental illness, the medications you get are to help you manage it. It doesn't take it away. It's such, and that's probably, you go back to the opioid epidemic, that's this kind of thinking that, you know, I should get this pill and the pain will be gone. And we have that with patients in the hospital. Well, my pain isn't controlled. Well, is it manageable? Because, and that's the same thing with mental illness. Is your mental illness manageable? And can our parks programs help people in day treatment programs, in programs where they're working to get over a mental illness? PTSD, and when you say PTSD, you always think of veterans, and we have a huge VA hospital not so far away from here. But PTSD can be from tragic events. We had another high school shooting yesterday. Not just people who were in California, but imagine all of the kids who go to high schools here who watched that. I had the news on for an hour last night, and it was on 4 times in an hour. The same pictures, the same horrible feeling. I turned it off and watched HGTV for a little bit. You need a break, you know? But these young people who are at a very vulnerable time, and they're going to our high schools, they can get something similar to PTSD just from watching news reports. I mean, 9/11, we watched over and over and over. And now these shootings are running together like just this one long story, and it's got to be damaging people. And then the last thing in people with mental illness is crisis recovery. Tragedies happen that we never know about to individuals, and they don't publicize them. And they have to keep their jobs, so they work their way through it during the time they're at work. They put the smile on, they do their job, they go home. And if they're going home to this urban environment without options, they're going to have these ruminative, why'd you use a word that big? They're going to have these ruminative thoughts. They're going to be sitting in their apartment where they might be staring at a brick wall. But having programs or having something in the park that's right downstairs, or just having the park downstairs to take a look at is such a benefit to these folks. And then senior citizens. We have a lot of people in the city, and many of them are older. And a lot of people are very healthy, and I have active living in here, because the way you stay healthy is by keeping moving. Look at Jimmy Carter. I mean, granted, after he hit his head, he probably should have got a little more medical treatment and not gone back to house building. All right, not the best judgment, but when your brain is bleeding, maybe you don't have the best judgment. But I fully believe that somebody who's 95 is 95 because they keep going. My dad was just like that. He retired at 70-something. He went home. My mother gave him a list. He went out and got another job. Went back to work. My mother was like, oh, here, the honey-do list. My dad said, I have to go to 7-Eleven and get coffee. And he got a job driving auto parts around because he was like, listen, I'm going to die if this is what I'm doing. And he lived well into his 80s, and he worked till 6 months before. I don't know whether he should have been driving. Whole nother story. But you keep active. So being active is so important. So in the senior citizen community, we have the frail elderly, and these are people who have a lot of things wrong with them, and they're usually in a nursing home, assisted type situation. Welcoming the staff to bring people to your space would be an utterly amazing way to use the garden, and very simple. You just have to say, come. You don't have to put up a program. They're just going to enjoy the space. Senior centers, there are senior centers all over. If you come up with a program and you send it out to Department of Aging, they will send it out to all of the senior centers, and they will come. They will. They love extra programming. Exercise. Naomi referenced exercise works better in a natural space. Tai Chi classes, a lot of parks have them already, but a lot of parks don't. So that's something that you can add. And a lot of the New York City parks do have flat grass space or paved space where it lends itself to that. I talked about active living, the dementia population. Dementia is not, it's not what people think it is. I do a dementia group, and I do middle to late stage people. And I don't ever ask them, do they remember? Because they don't. I know the answer, so why would you do that? It's more for your own satisfaction. Do you remember what we did last week? They don't remember how they got here. So what do? I live in the moment. I say, do you like this? They answer me. We read cards about different countries. Do they remember it? No, but their caregivers like learning something new. I do. You have so much that you can give if you just think about your middle to later stage people with dementia live in the moment. And they do make memories. And Dr. Oliver Sacks and I were talking about this, and he was doing research on this toward the end of his life, that people with dementia, till the very, very late stages, make emotional and procedural memories. So what's an emotional memory? An emotional memory is, I have dementia, and Stephanie comes over, and she gets mad because I said 300 times the same thing. And she's like, you told me that already. Do I remember that she did that? No. Do I remember what I told her 300 times? No. Do I remember the anger? Yes. So if we can give an opportunity for caregivers and family members to work in a park-like setting and create positive emotional memories, this will lend to better compliance by people with dementia when that person asks them to do something that's for their own good, like maybe brushing their teeth or bathing or any of those things. So you want to have opportunities for positive emotional memories and procedural memories. I have to tell you, I have 10 people in my group. I met none of them before they had middle stages of dementia. I have a Supreme Court judge. I have a well-known stockbroker, both of whom never touched a plant, and both of them know how to pot plants now. And if I put soil and a plant in front of them, they will put soil in the pot, they will put the plant in, they will follow every single step and look for a watering can. So, procedural memories. And then isolation. Isolation is a big thing in this city. And the reason it is how big are our apartments? 400 square feet? So people don't usually live in community. And as they age, their circle, how far they venture out from their place, gets smaller and smaller because they're not as steady on their feet. They get cold. They need places to sit. So we want to try to combat isolation by being welcoming. So what affordances, what things are going to make, and this is just a small list of many, what affordances are going to make your park more of a therapeutic environment? And the first thing is being recognizable, that people know that that's their place. And I have up here, I was going to ask people to guess which is which, but that's Inwood at the top, and then Van Cortlandt, and Battery, and then Gantry Plaza Park. So they're all very different looking, right? So people recognize their space. A sense of safety and security. And I talked about this a little with the obesity population, where they don't want to feel like they're in an unsafe place. Well-defined perimeters. Now, some parks, they're taking down fencing to make them more accessible. Others have fencing. The perimeter doesn't necessarily have to be around the whole park. But if you're looking for a space in your park for programming, how does that space get defined within the park itself? Is there that this is the place that we have these programs? This is the place where we can go and kind of be with our little group, if that's what you're doing. That contains space for programming, that people recognize it and that it's friendly. And then when you say that, you don't want a fishbowl effect. In other words, you don't want, like, you take the fountain out of Stuyvesant Square Park and you pave that over, and that's where all the GIMPs can go. That's not what you want, where everybody else is peeking in. You want a place that's kind of secluded in a safe way. And when I say well-defined perimeters, going back to that, you can define the perimeters with things from nature, with trees and shrubs that you can still see through, so people will know that there's something going on in there, but you don't have that fishbowl effect where everybody walking their dog isn't like, who's in there? What are they doing? Because people, especially people with mental illness, with anxiety, don't want to see people staring at them. How everybody goes on the subway with their eyes down because, God forbid, you look up and somebody says, "What you looking at?" So, yeah, so you kind of have to think about that. Lighting. Lighting is super, super important if you're going to use the space even into dusk. Older populations need ground lighting so that, okay, they come to your thing in the evening, and as dusk comes, it's time to leave. They might be moving slower than the average person. So it may be getting dark as they're leaving. You want good lighting if the place is used at all near dusk, or even on cloudy, dark days. And then a noise buffer. And this is, again, where most of us from New York City, our level of noise tolerance, I think, is higher than most. I know the first place at NYU we had our garden was on the corner of 34th Street and 1st Avenue. And I never noticed bus sounds. You know how busy that corner is. I never noticed. I'd be out in the garden and people would be like, "How do you work out here?" And I'd be like, why? It's beautiful. And they'd be like, "It's so noisy." The only thing I ever noticed was a change in cadence. When things became, like when there was an emergency and you would hear that kind of volume take up. Like I remember when a plane crashed into a building right off the East River. All of a sudden, you say something's wrong, and people are like, "What is wrong with you?" We had no TV down there. I was out in the garden, and I'm like, "Something's wrong. Let me go back in and check the news," and because you hear the cadence of what's around you change. But you want some kind of a noise buffer so that people who are dealing with maybe being easily perturbed, again, that mental health population, you want kind of a noise buffer. So if you have a big enough space where you can get off the busy street to find that place, that might be the answer. Accessibility, pathways, and so many of our parks have all these affordances already. But if you're picking a place for special programs, think about how these things kind of fit into that area. Interesting, accessible pathways, handrails. So many people need something to grab onto, and seating along the way. And that could be something as simple as adding a bench halfway between where someone would enter the park and where they would get to the space, because maybe they wouldn't be able to make it the whole way. If you're shade's very important, and you think for seniors, because you see everybody with those nice wraparound orange colored glasses, but think about mental health populations. Psychotropic medications make people very sensitive to light. People with brain injuries are often very sensitive to light, and the psychotropic medications also a lot of times make people get sunburned very easily. So you really need to provide shade, and I'm a sun lover, but you need to provide shade, and just for temperature control. If you're going to look to really bring special needs groups from facilities that may be wheelchair or have trouble ambulating, you might want to pick a space where it would be easily accessible for a bus or a van to drop them off. A lot of even the senior centers, Lenox Hill has a van that drives them around. Terrence Cardinal Cook has a van driver that takes the patients on trips, but they have to be able to stop and drop them off without getting a parking ticket. Shelter for the elements. Where will people go if all of a sudden it starts to rain? Remember, a lot of these groups don't move quickly. A lot of people need time to transition. So think about that. And restrooms. And that's the most expensive thing if you don't have them where you want them. But they're so very important. But the thing is, again, when you're picking a space, if you want to do programming, think of access to that restroom, because, again, special needs populations, it may take them longer to get to it. They may have urgency issues in the older population. So you want to make everything as friendly as possible, because that's how you're going to get people to use what you have. And then opportunities for people-plant interactions. So lush planting, we kind of have that in a lot of our parks. Inviting interactions, things that can be touched. And it's funny because, you see the lawn is closed. It's kind of a negative connotation. But I just got an email from Stuyvesant Park Association, and they're looking for funny ways to get signs that tell people to stay off the lawn while they're trying to grow it back. Non-toxic plant materials, at least in children's spaces or places where you're really looking to have programming for people who might not have good judgment or might put things in their mouths. That an Alzheimer's population is one of those, especially very late stage of Alzheimer's. They'll put anything in their mouth. I used to have a guy in my group who fought to eat the soil every single, and finally his wife is like, is it poisonous? And I was like, no. I use an organic potting mix, and she's like, let him taste it. He'll leave you alone. Because the poor aide was wrestling with the man for an hour. Every day, he'd put a little soil in his mouth, and he'd be like, that sucks. And that was the end of the conversation. And then he could go on to plant. So, but think about that.
We should use him for that research study on mycobacterium.
Oh, yeah. I'll check with his wife. Safe controls, meaning we don't want to use pesticides. Pesticides are expensive. They kill people. They kill good bugs. So especially, I know it's not quite that simple, but especially in an area that you're using for programming, think really hard about that. And then stimulating all the senses. And nature does that. We have that. We don't even have to work hard on that. So places with therapeutic programming, I'm just going to tell you about 4 different places. There are millions. Portland Memory Garden is one of 8 memory gardens in the United States. It is one of only 2 that are on public space, and it's at the back of a park, and it was designed for people with dementia. It has been well used. They have had trouble because of its public availability, but you notice the entranceway, allowing people to kind of look into and transition into the garden. It's got a circuitous path so that if somebody gets into the garden, they'll eventually end up back at that very recognizable entranceway. Singapore Parks Department actually has 3 different therapeutic parks that are within their garden system. And Singapore Parks is trying to transform Singapore into a biophilic environment. That's their mission. And you can look this up, and they have programming, and they actually, something that I'm going to talk about later is just having access to a way for people to reserve space. This just makes it easier. Carl Schurz Park, which John was there for many, many years, and this is something very simple. I mean, he has a great volunteer had a great volunteer organization when he was there. I'm sure they're still there. But he worked with PS 226, bringing children, high school students with autism into the park to work to build the social skills they need and to get jobs done. So there's a program. Nobody knows about it. I know about it because we both worked with the same teacher. I mean, you know, but something that simple. Do you have a special needs high school? Those kids stay in school for 3 extra years to build social skills and things like that. And then Riverside Park. Riverside Park is huge, and it has 12 playgrounds, and they're all accessible, and 6 of them have swings that allow for children that don't have the balance to stay on a string. They support them to stay on a swing. And 6 of them have transfer points, so a kid in a wheelchair can easily transfer. So it's a really good example of how to fix your park. So how do we bring this to a park near us? Possibilities for programming. Just think about this topic, and this is how you sell things. A relaxation session, something for restoration, an exercise group, plant exploration, great for kids. You know, children, you do 20 minutes about exploring and looking for plants, and then 20 minutes of a craft activity. That's probably all they need, and they will love your park forever. And they'll be bringing mom and dad there, because I've done programs and they come usually with a caregiver during the week, and then mom and dad will come back on the weekend. Vocational programming. We work with Stuyvesant Square, because we're right across the street, and we take care of one of the beds with our vocational trainees, who are people who come from Access VR that are being trained to work in the interior landscape, or we're kind of advanced training them for parks. And then food and nutrition. We talked about obesity. It's so easy if you can grow anything that's edible. Look at the spaces that we already have. Does something in your park lend itself to therapeutic programming? Walk through the park with a different set of eyes the next time you walk through, and think about where you could put something. And you can start really small, and believe me, they'll find you. What does it possess? What of those affordances we talked about? What could you move around that would maybe make it better? And who could use it? What of those groups would you want to target? And then know your neighborhood. Who are your neighbors? What cultural interests? They have Queen's Botanic Garden have put together a community garden that really kind of met the Asian culture there, where they could grow all of the things that they couldn't get around them, and really brought that population into the Botanic Garden. And then they came up with an intergenerational program, so they were bringing at-risk youth in to work with the seniors who were doing with the garden. What social service agencies might benefit? Everybody's on a tight budget. Nobody has enough space. This is New York. You have space. And who will lend a hand? Who would like to help? And what about programming? Is there a group that uses the park casually that might like something more formal? Can some, and I think this is probably key, can some specific space be made available for groups to use? Because if you say, and make it easy, you can go online and you can reserve an hour, and you have a system, and they do this. I saw this in the Singapore parks. Groups, not-for-profit groups, can just go online and reserve one of these spaces for an hour, 90 minutes, whatever. Is there someone in the park community that would volunteer a pilot program? Pilot programs are usually 6 weeks, but then you get interest. And then also, if you're looking for grant money to fund something, you know, no grantor wants to say, I have a dream, and they're like, yeah, we'll give you $10,000 for your dream. No. But if you say, I ran this program, I have this concrete program, I ran it for 6 weeks, we had this many people, here are the comments, you're more apt to get grant money. And Where are there professionals who will advise? So when I say professionals who will advise, think about college students who are looking for credit, who are doing internships in these healthcare facilities or in these special needs facilities. So look around, the resources are here, we have the place, we certainly have a lot of people, we have the plans, and we just have to put the pieces together to start the journey. Thank you. So now I think Naomi and I are going to answer some questions.
Thank you both, Gwen and Naomi. Thank you for joining us up on the stage. We're going to have a quick Q&A in just a minute, followed by a breakout session, and then if you'll stay with us from 12:15 to 1 o'clock, we're going to head down to the park and do a forest bathing session in Madison Square Park. I am Miriam Federa. I'm our Director of Public Programs here at the Conservancy. 4 years ago, we designed the Mad Square Hort program, Stephanie Lucas and I, and here we are. We designed the program to be an interfacing public program to connect patrons in and around the park to horticulture within our 7-acre green space. Mad Square Hort presents free monthly garden tours, evening talks, as well as opportunities to connect with our garden team to answer horticulture questions throughout the year. We celebrated National Public Gardens Week by building a seasonal greenhouse to showcase our Mad Square Hort efforts to combat plant blindness in the park. Can you hear me? Okay. Plus, we present hands-on opportunities such as Leaf Fest, which is happening this weekend. There was a slide earlier that Naomi showed. It's a great event where people come out and just rake leaves. They love it. We are currently planning our 2020 Mad Square Hort public programs, and I would really love to hear your feedback. We have a survey over there at the entrance, so please feel free to fill that out, please. And then finally, if you want to just keep up to date with us, please stay in touch with us through our e-news, and you can learn a lot more about, we have a membership program, so it's a good way to stay connected to the park at just a really low membership level. It keeps you involved in the neighborhood as well. There's lots of great perks in there. That's my spiel. I'm going to pass it over to Naomi and Gwen to answer questions for the next 10, 15 minutes. And we have mics going around the room, okay? So feel free to ask questions.
Naomi, I have a question for you. You cited a lot of great studies.
Yes.
Can you talk about the scope and the statistical significance of the studies?
That's a big question. Can I talk about the scope and significance of the? Yes. I think all of the studies that I mentioned, the ones that were empirical, that were quantitative, I should say, they reached statistical significance. So without getting into statistics and too much numbers, if it is a quantitative study, for the results to be really notable, for the study to be published, something needs to reach statistical significance. The qualitative studies, where it's more based on behavior observation and mapping, interviews, focus groups, that's a little harder to, because it's not numbers, but I keep bumping into this thing. But they're still valid evidence. I'm a very strong believer in qualitative research and mixed methods research and not just quantitative. Everyone thinks that quantitative research is objective. People still design the experiment. People still analyze the data. And qualitative researchers are often much more aware of their own biases, and they have to be much more upfront about that. So, there's plenty of research that's kind of but the ones that I chose were very robust and rigorous.
Any other questions?
And while we're waiting for the mic to be Oh, well, he got it. I just wanted to mention that a lot of the things that Gwen talked about, I forgot to mention evidence-based design or research-informed design, which is basically designing with the research in mind. And so a lot of the things that Gwen talked about are making actionable the research. So the research is great because it's saying that nature is restorative and in some ways how, but then how do you translate that to physical spaces? And so that's really a lot of what Gwen was talking about. So you have a question, yes?
Yeah. That's actually what my question was about.
Oh.
Have you found any
I'm psychic.
successful strategies for, implementing like this research, getting it into the brains of policymakers and designers in order to like allot certain amounts of like public space for these sorts of activities? Like what are some like on the ground ways that you've found that have made for, 10% or 20% more of a park to actually be dedicated to like therapeutic spaces?
Do you want to speak to that first?
Yeah. I think a lot of that has to come from the community, from the park, because if the spaces are already existing, it's different if they're developing a new space and then you bring the research to the hopefully landscape designer, or if they're putting up a building and there's going to be setbacks that could be used as outdoor spaces. That's where that research really needs to get to the architects and landscape designers for redesigning. But on the ground level, it can come from the community, and I think that's a very organic way for it to happen. To say we have all this space, let's try this, let's see how this works, and then move it forward. And this Naomi's Therapeutic Landscape Networks really makes all of this research very searchable and accessible to anybody in the park. So you can go to the Parks Commissioner and say, we have this research, we have this group here, we have this target population, can we do this? So I think with existing spaces, a ground roots organic effort usually is a good way to start, but at the design build level, I think that's where this research needs to be, and the program we teach in Chicago does that, where we're teaching architects and landscape architects about therapeutic garden design, but there's certainly not enough of it, and there's a lot of architects, especially big-time urban architects, who don't even have a landscape architect, they just put some plants in, so we want to get that word out there.
Yes.
Yes, we're very happy to hear that segment about buildings and views of nature through the windows, and how we need more of that. Could you also speak about efforts to make these windows safe for birds? Because we know that that's a huge problem in this city right now. Some cities are implementing some regulations about that. What's being done in New York City?
That's a really good question, and you bring up a really good point about safety for birds. And unfortunately, birds fly into a lot of windows. And even I went to a talk at Cornell about a year ago, and I was just shocked at how many birds are killed each year through windows. And so they're great for us to look out of. And sometimes these courtyard gardens are a particular problem, because birds fly in and then they can't figure out how to get out, and so they just end up flying into the windows. There are cities, I want to say Seattle, but I could be wrong, but that are implementing specific, Stella, you might know, with biophilic cities. Stella Tarde is right there. You can raise your hand. She does biophilic cities DC, and she's awesome. But in New York City, I don't know what the policies are. And there are some guidelines. I think the Audubon Society on their website has guidelines. American Bird Conservancy. So look them up. Again, kind of back to your question, this is something where you need the evidence about not only how many birds are being killed, you need that to know what to avoid and what to work towards so that you can do this research-informed design and then implement policies. And case studies are a really good example too. So I think that organization has case studies of buildings and window types and treatments that work. It's a good question. Yep, and then in the front.
You referenced hospitalized patients looking at a wall versus nature. Question, and even looking at a picture of nature. Question, couldn't one bring in a lot of plants into these rooms?
I'll let you speak.
Especially those that don't have windows to look out?
So we have horticultural therapy program at NYU, and for almost all populations, we have gotten the policy that people are allowed to have plants in their room. We just finished research on the difference in people's perception of their stay in acute rehabilitation with plants and pictures of nature in their room versus not, and that's going to publication within the year with significant results that it is advantageous. The problem that you have and the reason that there's resistance is, first of all, there's kind of an old school philosophy that, you know, plants bring bugs indoors and dirt is dirty, and so that's an education thing, and as I said, we do that at NYU, and we do that at a lot of other places too. I get calls from all different hospitals, and they're like, how do you have dirt in your rooms? And I'm like, well, it's not dirt. We'll start there. But we talk about what we use and what populations it's okay for, and where we draw the line. And we might use VR, and we might use technology in something that's not quite as soil-based. But so yes, it is helpful. We are getting significant results to that end. There's a lot of problem in more acute care settings because there's so much equipment, and things get moved, and there's no light, and or no natural light. If you look at the design of the new Kimmel Pavilion, the new NYU hospital, the windows face out all over the place. They get it, and I think new design is moving in that direction, where people can see nature, and from the upper rooms there are views of green areas below and water. So I think healthcare is getting it. There's all these committees on healthcare design and healthcare garden design that really get the message. It's just changing existing spaces is I think a big problem. And then also, how do you deal with nature versus technology? And so in some spaces, I think virtual nature is going to be the way we have to go.
Small suggestion. There are certain plants that thrive just in water. You could put them on a little, something that moves, that you could just move it on wheels and move it out of the way of equipment, even in the hallway while you're doing something, then bring it back in. Just a suggestion.
It's a great idea. With all but very compromised populations, it would be a great thing. They won't even let vase water in on immunocompromised populations because that can cause bacteria growth. But for the regular acute care population, that is a wonderful idea. Something on wheels that could. Thank you, everyone.
You had a question in the front? There's a woman right in the front who needs a microphone. Oh, yes, and please.
Oh, and there's somebody's been waiting over there.
Oh, yes, thanks.
On the same topic, some people in my building are also asking the same question. What plants would be helpful in a lobby if we don't have someone maintaining it that would kind of decrease anxiety, increase beauty, and whether it's flowers that we have to maintain, or some people also mentioned even like today's fake flowers look so beautiful. So are there any quick hits that we could suggest, because that was posed in one of our meetings recently?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And just to add, so in healthcare, it is harder because even if there's less of a risk, there's a perception of risk, especially with patients who are severely immunocompromised, either from soil or from bacteria in the water. It's also an issue of maintenance. So like, for example, in healthcare, water fountains are usually safe if they're properly maintained. But the maintenance is key. And if a healthcare organization doesn't have the maintenance policy or the funding to keep on top of that, then it can be dangerous or even just really depressing. The worst thing, even worse than no plants, is a dead plant. And so, I mean, I was in a doctor's office once with a dead plant in the corner, and I was like, is that what they're gonna do to me? They can't even take care of a potted plant. So I think that also knowing the facility, the school, the office, how much they can, or the community, how much can they do in terms of maintenance is really important to understand before starting some grand, like green wall that's gonna fix everything except when it dies. And to bring it back to research, there was a great study published 2 years ago that was a cancer facility where they had fake plants, live plants, and fake plants and live plants, and they asked the cancer patients in the waiting room, which would you prefer, no plants, silk plants that look very realistic, or real plants? And the answer was real plants, but fake plants are better than nothing, as long as you dust them. So people still wanted life and living things, but if that wasn't possible because they were concerned about their being immunocompromised and infection control, then they wanted at least a semblance of life. And that was still better than nothing. And I think, Gwen, you have some probably practical thoughts and maybe a website or two that people could go to, in addition to the TLN, of course.
Okay, so for a lobby, I would say, it's got to be a tropical plant. The door's open, so it has to be something that tolerates cold. If you really want to look for examples, look in the mall, because the mall has figured it out. They know what things will tolerate the most, Chinese evergreens, things like that. And if you want to start small and see what does well, you don't have to go ahead and bring in a ton of stuff. If it's really well received, then your organization may choose to hire an interior plantscape company, which will install a plant display, send somebody by once a week to take care of it, and replace what dies before it looks dead. So that's probably the best way to go, unless you have some other magical way of taking care of things. But live things need some care, and it's always preferred.
So this, and then over there.
Thank you for all your work. It's awesome. I wanted to be a horticultural therapist 30 years ago and didn't know whether it would be much of a job, but it's really turned into a fabulous thing. Right. So I chose landscape design instead, and what I wanted to mention is for people to think outside the box. There is a fantastic garden in Toronto called the Music Garden, and a landscape designer collaborated with Yo-Yo Ma, and so took planting to another level, really sort of put a whole music overlay on this garden, and so you can appreciate it at all different levels. You can walk through with earphones and appreciate, staccato and pauses and all those sorts of things. And also I did myself design a little garden for a severely disabled home, and just putting, it was an institute, just putting a fountain that had running water, to see how these people responded was unbelievable. It truly, truly makes a difference and truly touches them and brings out something that nothing else can, like the sound of water, or seeing a flower floating in the pond, or in the pool is quite magical. So it does work. It does work. Great.
Am I next, or who's next?
There's a woman there, and then
Okay. So
Yes,
I'll
please.
just go real quick. Good morning. Thank you for your information. I really appreciate it. I would like to offer some resources with regards to activating open and green spaces, in particular New York City park spaces, and that entails parks, playground, waterfronts, street trees. There are several programs at New York City parks that is available to the public. It all depends on the hyper-local scene, who is there, what's the neighborhood, and what's the climate of the park. Partnershipsforparks.org is one organization that's available in all 5 boroughs to begin stewarding and becoming a park group or a garden group. There's Green Thumb for community gardens that's on park spaces. There's stewardship for street trees, and for some free programming, I can suggest New York Shape Up, or Shape Up NYC, and then outside of that, the purview is New York Restoration Project. And Partnerships for Parks works with New York City Parks, operations, and community building to build groups and what you're doing is exactly what what our program does, to create these hubs where people want to engage their natural spaces because that's where they live and that's their backyard. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you. I think there's one more question. We have time for one more question. Someone's already holding a mic, I believe. Yes, there you are. Okay.
I wanted to say how important it was to, as you're encouraging these plans, to put the concept of the importance of nature and greenery and living things within the context of those who are basically in a closed space. I remember how impressed I was with the chronic care facility that's since been torn down for the, I think it's the Cornell development on Roosevelt Island. But it was wonderful. It was low rise. They had windows and greenery everywhere. And the people who lived there could go out and sit on the esplanade and look at the view that other people are paying millions for. Unfortunately, it's not there anymore. These places often tend to be high-rise because of, economic and space planning. But the idea of getting across to the planners and the designers how crucial it is for people to have access to the natural world, both plants and creatures.
Yep. Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah, and I live in DC now, and but my heart is sort of still in New York, and it's so encouraging, all of the things that are happening in New York City. And I think that we are really in this upswing time, and as Stephanie said, perhaps this is tied with climate change and people's concern about it. But I encourage everyone, while the iron is hot, to strike and to make the most of it, because these things do go in cycles, and hopefully we're in a long cycle where people will continue to be advocating for nature and connection with nature, but we never know when that cycle is going to go around again. And so I'm really glad that everyone's here, and keep passing the word.
I also want to thank everyone for spending your time with us this morning. I am local, and I am happy to help anyone if you're looking to kind of talk about what programming would look like or anything like that. Shoot me an email. You can look me up at NYU Langone, and I hope to hear from some of you. So thanks.
And come see me afterwards. I have some cards about the TLN.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce Regina Ginyard and Jen Herzl. Regina is one of the founding members of the Black Urban Growers, BUGS. BUGS hosts national conferences every year with over 400 Black, rural, and urban farmers, nutritionalists, educators, and others in the related fields. Regina is also one of the co-founders of La Finca de la Sur, and the first woman of color-led urban farm collectives located in the South Bronx. Over the last few years, Regina has become a strong advocate for increased mental health awareness and the removal of bureaucratic barriers for people dealing with mental health crisis. Through providing frontline support to a loved family member with a mental health diagnosis, Regina was inspired to create a space called Therapeutic Outdoors. Therapeutic Outdoors combines the power of nature and a vast network of holistic service practitioners to create an inclusive, accessible, and affordable space for individuals to heal from various forms of trauma. Jen Herzl has been an educator for 14 years, a Bronx-based farmer for 4 years, and an overall lover of all things plants-related for her entire life. She graduated with a BA in anthropology from Yale University and an MA in social enterprise with a focus on education from American University. She's the founder of At the Root, an herbal eatery farm and apothecary, ATR, exists to create opportunities for people of the African diaspora to heal the relationships with their bodies and with the earth. So I'm going to hand it over to them. They're hosting a wonderful breakout session for you guys. They're going to use those journals that you have with you. So thank you again for joining us.
Hello, beautiful people. How are you today? Yeah. I feel like I'm like a rock star right now. I'm about to say thank you, good night. It's been wonderful. New York, you've been amazing. All right, so we have a networking activity for you all today. But first, we're going to just like obviously kind of like set everything up. Obviously, I'm here. My name is Regina Ginyard. You've already heard a lot about me. Just want to tell you a little bit more about the Black Farmers and Urban Gardeners National Conference, i.e. BUGS. BUGS is an organization committed to building networks and community support for growers in both urban and rural setting. Through education and advocacy around food and farming issues, we nurture collective Black leadership to ensure we have a seat at the table. As mentioned, BUG has hosted national conferences every year. And as mentioned here, we have been in, our conference has been packed up and went on the road to Oakland, Detroit, Atlanta, Raleigh, Durham. And as some of you might already know in the room, we just recently held our 9th conference at the New School a couple weeks ago. So that was really exciting. And yeah, okay, there we go. So just moving right along. Therapeutic Outdoors. And I'm also going to share a similar story. I think it was Stephanie who mentioned earlier about a loved one. But I'm going to just quickly read through these notes here. Therapeutic Outdoors combines the power of nature. I think Miriam already kind of touched on it, and I guess you guys could read the notes as I talk. But what really sparked to me from creating this space was I too had a loved one who had a untreated and undiagnosed mental health issue, and still kind of very challenging for me to talk about. And God, thought I had it. It's my first time kind of talking about it in public. And yeah, so through trying to find various ways for him to get services, I ran across various barriers. Every therapist I called wouldn't take our insurance. And we went from a 2-income household to 1, and it was very challenging for me to pay for those services. And then obviously when things got worse and it came to the thought of maybe hospitalizing my loved one, we ran into additional barriers around that and cost. And so as I was struggling trying to prop him up and get the services that he needed and finding ways to do that with very limited means, it was tough. And so I say all of that to say that I felt that when he had the most internal peace, if you will, is when he was really steeped into Eastern philosophy, and when he was really implementing Buddhist practices into his life, i.e. meditation, yoga, all of the things. When he was reading all the books and he was really kind of implementing a lot of those values. He loved the outdoors, and we did a lot of hiking and cycling and being out in nature, obviously tying this back to bugs and La Finca del Sur. I was always in the garden, and he felt a lot of peace there as well. And it was also while I was trying to find services for him, I remember, meeting with a friend for lunch, and I was just kind of going through my thing, and she asked me, so Regina, what's going on with you? And I'm like, what do you mean? We're talking about, let's talk about this right now. So she's like, no, how's your mental health? And I was like, never really thought about that. And so realizing that I was supposed to be walking around as really a zombie, right? I think I probably got to doing a lot of self-medication in terms of eating a lot. I gained 15 pounds. That glass of wine to decompress every night turned into probably a couple glasses of wine. I think we've all kind of been there at times. And so for me, I said, how do I really find ways in which to, combine all the things I love, gardening, the outdoors, all the things that he really loved, meditation, yoga, writing. He was an amazing writer. And combine all of these things with the limited means that we both had. And so that's pretty much what sparked Therapeutic Outdoors. And just kind of taking it a step further, as I was in the garden and in the Bronx and working with so many brown and black people. And while I was gardening and talking about my story, it was in those moments in the garden that I met other people who were dealing with similar issues. And it might not have been as much as far as mental health, but they had a family member that had a health crisis. They were going through a health crisis or financial issues or you name it, just as adults, right? It's challenging. And so I just say all that to say that that when I was sitting with that friend and she was asking me about my mental health and she was asking me about when was the last time I incorporated some joy into my life and how am I manifesting more joy and taking more time for myself. That's pretty much how we kind of segue into the Joy Project. So today we're going to sort of do a mini version of what that Joy Project is, and we're going to focus more on the happy side because we're not, there's so many other ways that we can address this, but because we have such a limited time, we're going to focus on manifesting joy in everyone's life here and how do we really go about doing that. So Jen, if you want to take it over.
Yeah, so I'm Jen. I was already talked about in the beginning. Regina and I do a lot of healing work, specifically in green spaces and using plants. And some of that work is specifically geared towards stress reduction. We've already heard stress touched on a couple times here, so I will not go on my little diatribe about how important it is to decrease our stress in our everyday lives, especially chronic and negative stress.
Right.
Because part of our work is focused on stress reduction, we really wanted to focus today on basically creating space and time to highlight and augment the joy that's already in our lives. So as Regina mentioned, we're going to do a very extremely brief version of workshops that we do in a much longer time span.
Right.
So what you want to do is you want to take the
or you want to read the questions? Or did you already read the question? Sorry.
Oh, no, I'm not there yet.
Okay.
Go ahead and take the journal out that you were given. Pen or pencil is fine. What we're going to do is we have a few questions up on the board. We'll go through them real quick with you. You can choose which one you feel called to answer. If you can answer more than one in the 2 minutes allotted for writing or jotting down notes, you're welcome to do so. The two questions we have up, the first one, why does it seem so challenging to manifest?
That's not. It's the next slide.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Okay.
There we go, sorry.
Yeah.
The first question, what green spaces bring you joy in the city and why? The second question, today, if you declared that you will do more of what you love and what makes you happy, what would that look like? And the third question is, how would you make time for it in your daily or weekly routine? We wanted to make sure that we were having you guys really think about things that were actionable. So once you walk out of this room, something that you can actually implement in the moment as opposed to kind of the, oh, great, that's wonderful to think about.
Yeah.
So we're going to...
And really just wanting to tie all of it together, as we said. I mean, this is really about, again, just kind of as adults, and adulting is really challenging, we really want to take this time for you to really just have that moment. As my friend had with me, we're having it with you, to just take a moment and to reflect on these questions, write them out, and then we're going to have you share out with your neighbor to the right of you.
Great. So we are going to limit you to 2 minutes to jot down thoughts. I'm sorry.
Maybe three.
We said it was brief.
I don't know how much. Okay.
And then we can kind of time the share out. So you can go ahead and do your thinking.
All right. Time to reflect. Enjoy that was some good pastry. I don't blame you. Are you done?
Well, thank you, Regina and Jen. Now please join me in welcoming Amos Clifford, who will speak to the importance of forest therapy in an age of climate crisis. Amos is the founder of the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy Guides and Programs. He's also the author of the best-selling book, Your Guide to Forest Bathing. A student of the Buddhist philosophy for over 20 years, Amos has founded Sky Creek Dharma Center in Chio, California, where he has emphasized the importance of meditation practices in wild places. Amos is widely known for his work in restorative justice. He is the founder of the Center for Restorative Process, where he has led the inquiry into how the principles of restorative justice can inform ways to heal the broken relationships between humans and the more than human world of nature. Amos holds a BS in Organization Development and an MA in Counseling from the University of San Francisco. Amos has been the primary developer of ANFT's acclaimed training programs. Welcome, Amos.
Let's see, is what I'm seeing on the screen what's up there? Okay, so I'll advance it, I guess. Yeah, there we are. Hi, everybody. Well, I'm feeling so grateful for these presenters who have been up here and the work that they're doing. Anyone else feeling that? Isn't that really beautiful? Yeah. And for the group, the organization that has put this together today, just super grateful for them too. Because look what they've done. They brought us all together for a day of dialogue, a nice morning in this beautiful city. I had never spent a night in this city before until last night, and I just found myself thinking, what the hell have I been thinking? You know? Because anyway, I'm really grateful to be here. And my topic is, can forest therapy play a role in responding to global climate crisis? I will sometimes word that climate catastrophe or just the catastrophe, because it's not just climate. It's also plastics and mass extinction and insect apocalypse, and overpopulation and depopulation of the fish in the oceans and other places, and there's a time that's upon us now that is a very significant time. It's what we might refer to as a liminal time in the history of humanity. Liminal meaning we're in between times where things might be predictable or normal. Is anyone feeling that? Feeling that sense, kind of like the bets for the future are sort of off or very tenuous? Anyone else feeling that? This is a very significant feeling to have, and I think a really defining feeling right now. So when I founded the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy, this was actually what motivated me. I had been out on some experiences with vision fasting and rites of passage and really just holding the question, what can I do to be of service as I come into my eldering years? So I'm very young to be considered an elder, but I did an initiation. They said, here's your cane. They didn't tell me they were going to bust my knee up a little while later, but anyway, and I thought about it for several years, and I came across, for me, my big instinct is we have to remember who we are as a species in context of this incredibly beautiful planet that we have, and of all the other beings on this planet. And so when you think of forest bathing, you may think of it in terms of the Japanese and Korean research, which has had to do with human well-being. And to that I say yes, and it has to do with much more than that. So I want to just invite you into a little forest bathing experience right now, and then we'll have another one later down in the park. But this might be a way to set the tone. And so I just invite you to let your eyes just naturally close if you can, and come into that internal space inside of yourself where your awareness of your body lives, and your awareness of what it's like to be here in this room on this morning. The unique experience of being human in this moment. And with your eyes closed and feeling into your body, inviting you also into that space where memory and imagination meets. And in that space, think of a tree. Allow a tree that has been in some way significant or important to you in your life to appear. And noticing that tree, which may have been from long ago or this morning or any time. Noticing the details of that tree. Allowing your memory to be helped by your imagination. The shapes and textures. And perhaps some of the smells and movements of the tree. You might even have a sense of the smell of the soil in which your tree is rooted, and feeling your feet on the floor, recall along with that tree the feeling of being rooted. And thinking also of what that tree meant to you, what experiences you had there. Emotional experiences, social experiences, solitude, grief, joy, whatever it was that you experienced in the companionship of that tree. And noticing as you're remembering this tree that in this space of memory and imagination, this is today an alive relationship for you. And I'm wondering, what are the qualities of that relationship? And in a moment, I'll invite you to open your eyes, but not just yet. When I do, I invite you to get with one of your neighbors and share your tree stories with each other about this particular tree that's come to you in your memory and your imagination, and about what it has meant to you. So go ahead and open your eyes now and share. Take one more minute, please. Okay, allow your stories to come to an end. Find the place where you feel complete with your story. And just bring your attention back. Just bring your attention back now. Letting the story just end. I'd like to take this another step further, and I'd like to, in a moment, I'm going to give a little bit of instruction, but I'd like to invite you to stand, and when you stand, to imagine your tree, and imagine yourself occupying the space where your tree is right now. Imagine your body being an invitation for that tree to be here in this room imaginally with us. Perhaps even using your arms and your trunk to take on something of the shape of the tree. Go ahead and stand now, please. Become the tree, let it become you. And turn and look at the forest in the room. As you're doing this, just have a look at the forest that we have here in the room with us. Thinking of all the meaning in this forest, all the relationships, all the gifts that we've been given. And can we just hold the story that this forest is with us today? Does that feel okay? That this forest is with us today. All right, thank you. Go ahead and sit down again. Thank you for doing that. I was sitting in a conference room once with a mentor of mine, and I was lamenting, this was in California, and I was lamenting that the place where we were sitting had once been a redwood grove long ago. It's in a city called Corte Madera, which means cut wood. And he said, it still is. Those trees are still with us. Close your eyes, Amos. Feel them. So I hope you have something of that. And so with my initiation, I looked for a practice that could help people remember our relationship with nature, and to do that in a very fast way. It doesn't require a commitment to go out on a 12-day vision fast or something like that, which I'd done a lot of, but there's very few people that'll do that. Draw the pie chart, right? Who's going to go on a vision fast? It's a hairline. I wanted a bigger piece of the pie because this is critical. In my opinion, we're not going to make it if we don't do this work. The work you just did of remembering that you're in relationship with other than human beings, and that those relationships are important to you and to the other beings. So I found this practice, Shinrin-yoku, the Japanese practice, and I was really excited by some things. One is it's incredibly accessible. They're saying, oh yeah, we take them for 3-hour walks and we don't go very far. You know, if I take you on a 3-hour walk in my forest where I guide in California, we'll go 200 yards. And it's going to be a very full 3 hours for you. They said it's not about naturalist education, it's about being in our bodies and in our senses. I like to say forest therapy, forest bathing, is more about being here than it is about getting there, right? And so that's when I founded the Association of Nature and Forest Therapy Guides. It really was founded as a response to global climate crisis. And my colleagues and I have developed a specific method of forest therapy. We have a framework that involves the theory part has to do with the way of the guide and the language of invitation. The practical part has to do with the thing that we call the standard sequence, a particular set of invitations that we give that have proven very reliable for helping people connect. And that's in use in at least 55 countries that we know of now, just from the guides that we've trained. And so, you know, one way we can describe forest therapy is it's a practice that just supports wellness of people, but critically, also the wellness of other than human species and ecosystems. And I just want to invite us all to expand our thinking beyond the human-centric here, and to think about how is our wellness related to the wellness of other than human beings. They can't be separated. They're the same thing. So it can be practiced in many settings besides forest. That's why we call it nature and forest therapy in our program. One of our trainers in New Zealand mostly guides along the beach on the Great Barrier Island, for example, and then we have other guides who work in desert settings. To learn this, it's best learned from trained guides, and so I'm really grateful that we have a bunch of guides that are going to give you a taste of it. Guides, how many guides do we have in the room? Can we just see? Looks like they're kind of mostly clustered over there and a couple up here. And thank you for being here. I saw on the sign down there that I was in the park this morning that I'm going to be guiding, and it's not very likely because of my injury that I have. Really critically, we call it forest therapy, but we don't see the guides as therapists. We're not training therapists. So I'm trained as a psychotherapist. I practiced as a psychotherapist for about a decade. I know that it is serious and requires serious training and supervision. I've also worked for decades as a guide, and I know what that requires. I know the difference between the two of them. So we train guides. And so what we say is that the forest is the therapist, and the role of the guide is to help you show up and to develop the relationships within which healing can happen. And so one of our little catchphrases is the forest is the therapist and the guides open the doors. Now, I was thinking about this presentation because it's a horticultural society, and I've never really thought much about horticulture or horticulture therapy, and so I was thinking, what could I say about that here? And one thing is that plants are fundamental in this practice, that the relationships with plants is really a critical piece of what we do. The guides who miss that miss one of the key points of the practice. And if we're talking about relationships, we're talking about it in the sense of holding the story that these other than human beings are sentient and are capable of entering into relationship with us also in some way. I'm not saying that this is a fact. I'm saying this is a story that's very useful. I will say the science is catching up on this now. Some of you have been probably following this, but for me as a guide, part of what the story that I need to hold is when I am in the forest, it is sentient. I'm walking through a field that is incredibly intelligent and that interacts with me in ways that sometimes seem purposeful and meaningful, especially when I'm willing to be in my imaginal way of sensing. So I was inviting you to experience a little bit of that in our imaginal journey to our tree and into the forest. This very, very potent faculty we have. Einstein talked about it. He said imagination is more important than knowledge. I don't think he was just making up a cute saying. I think this is literally true. And I'm not talking about imagination in the sense of our capacity to create fantasies. I'm talking about it as a sensory field through which we are continually receiving impressions from the world around us that can inspire and inform us. And the trees and the stones and the creeks and the clouds, the deer and the coyotes and the skunks, they can all make impressions that can inform us in different ways that are really important. And so this capacity to have these relationships requires us, by us I mean as a species, as human beings, to shift how we view them and how we experience them. This story I'm offering you of sentience is a support to shift how we experience them. And this shift in experiencing is a remembering, because it is not that far in the past of our species that this was taken for granted, that there were other than human beings that were intelligent. As we deepen this capacity, our consciousness begins to change in a positive way. So this is the story we're guided by. So if you look at the Japanese and Korean research, it's stress reduction, relaxation, improved immune response. Yes, I say yes to all of that. That's beautiful. There's some pretty good research on that. The cumulative research is pretty strong on this, and we could say a lot more. In some places, the research has been sketchy, but it's been improving a lot. But what I would say is that with forest bathing, because it was the focus of the early research, it's widely assumed that this is what forest bathing is about. And I say, yeah, but for me, it's much more. So this is our story. People and all terrestrial species, you are born out of the earth. You are a part of it. And the earth has seeded within each of us, just as it is seated within a plant, the knowing of how to grow and flower and bring whatever the medicine of that plant is into the world. It's seated within each of us, those kinds of potentials that can grow into a knowing and the capacity to take the action that is needed now, in these times. Not a generation ago. We're still living as if it was a generation ago. The actions that are needed now are different. And when a critical mass of humanity develops these potentials, we call them medicines usually in the training, these potentials, everything we need to navigate the crisis will be present. That doesn't mean it's going to be easy. I think it's going to be really hard. But you know, I was talking to Naomi about this last night, and we were reflecting on, when do you write the best poetry of your life? What do you say? Any guesses? You've had this experience, right? It's when you're suffering. When do you produce the most songs and art and so on? And you know, my feeling is, may this time that we're coming into, may this time be the time when humanity produces its best songs and its best poetry. Do you understand the sense in which I'm saying that? That as a species, that the poetry of who we are can be beautiful as we navigate this. And this kind of developing our potentials doesn't mean becoming more of. If you think of all the good stuff we have, it doesn't mean just more of that. It means different than that in ways that may be very difficult to recognize when it appears. We can't even know what to expect. But I can tell you that the more time we spend in the forest and nature, and particularly in our imaginations, in the field of relationship, the more something interesting starts emerging. I talked to several guides last night at a reception we had who told me the same story. They said, "This practice has transformed my life." And it's a little hard to dig into that. What do you mean it's transformed your life? I heard one story that really went to my heart. A man said, "I've lived on this property for 34 years with the turtles, and I was aware of them. But through the training and the practicum, I came into relationship with them, and I became aware of their pain and the challenges they face and the struggles they face. And I started getting really curious about that." And this man told me that, moved by this relationship that sprung between him and the turtles, he deeded some of his land for the turtles, to the turtles, to support them. That's a different consciousness that allows that to happen. It's also that story I told him. That's why I founded ANFT, that story. This is, in my view, what forest therapy can be about. This knowing of what to do, and this incredibly powerful action to do what we can do in our particular lives. So when we train forest therapy guides, we're not training therapists. We don't prescribe a curriculum or attempt to create any particular experiences beyond just building these connections, these relationships. You may have seen research that says if you go into the forest, you might feel awe. We don't say, if I'm taking you in the forest, I don't say, "Oh, let's go and feel awe today," because I don't know what you need. And I don't know what the forest is going to uniquely offer you on that day. And this is a critical differentiation between guide and therapist. We're not authorities on what you need, other than we all need to go deeper into this field of relationship, to find what it tells us about ourselves and how to live in the world. And the faculty of imagination, the capacity for whimsy and curiosity, playfulness is really important. We emphasize also following simple pleasures. If you want to right now, you can notice in this room and how the air is flowing through it, this growing warmth in the room, the presence of being here. You can notice simple pleasure is here right now. And it's a reliable guide when we're in the forest to showing us our way into this kind of consciousness, pleasure, beauty, harmony, these kinds of things. We suggest, we invite you to look at those as guides if they serve. And my whole thesis is it's these relationships. It's the field of relationship that will produce the emergence of new ways of knowing and being. When we're talking about healing, we're talking more about becoming whole than we are about fixing specific conditions. I think this is really congruent with the slide on wellness that was up here earlier. Wellness is not the absence of disease, but what does it mean to be whole? Do we even know what it means to be whole? What if we've never experienced being whole before? How would we know what that's like? I don't think we can be whole apart from relationships with nature, because we are nature. I also heard a story, I think it was, again, Naomi, last night when we were talking about a film where an organization made saying, tell us about nature. You know, what do you know about nature? And someone said, and I think the filmmaker, they were standing in front of a tree or something. They're saying, well, it's when you go far away to the mountains over there. You go to the national park or something. And no one said, here, I would like to show you something really beautiful from the natural world right now. We do this right in this moment. Will you look at your hand? Just look at your hand. And move your hand and look at it closely. Maybe even look at it with love and appreciation for everything that it's been and done for you. Welcome to nature. Right? I was reading in a book, there's a book that I really love that's called Plants as Persons, a Philosophical Botany. Anyone know that book? Very beautiful book. And the author was reviewing what some other philosophers had said, and these guys, Wandersee and Schussler, have developed this idea of plant blindness as a disease, that we're so separated from plants that we don't even see them or focus on them, that we think they're just a background for animal life, or that we overlook the importance of them to human lives, or that we misunderstand the differing time scales of plant and animal activity. What does that one mean? I'll give you an example. Where I live in California, there's these oak forests. And the oak forests have a very interesting relationship with a particular kind of jay, the scrub jay. The scrub jay goes in and gets the acorns, flies out of the oak forest 50 to 100 feet and buries them. Remembers where 80% of them are, leaves 20%. The forest grows in that direction. If we were to do a time lapse over 1,000 years, we would literally see forests migrating across the landscape. From the forest perspective, they're moving in ordinary time, in ordinary forest time. This is one example of the different kinds of experiences of time scales that we have. And when I think about this, I think about the whole question about wholeness. If we can shift our perspectives, and if we can allow our plant companions to help us shift our perspectives, if we can do this through relationships, will we find that it's really a new way of being, a new way of knowing, experiencing, relating? The question that I hold for myself and invite you to hold with me is, can an immersion in this field of vegetal knowing catalyze an evolutionary leap? My premise is that when the crisis comes, that it is in some ways the Earth's dreaming of the next phase of humanity, the Earth's invitation for us to learn a new way of being. I'm calling this, I've just taken last week to calling this new way of being the entangled mind, and I don't know if that term's gonna hold, but since I started calling it that, as I often have, it's like, oh, I made up a new word. Already I've seen 15 other references to it because people start emailing me. And yesterday I had a text where someone was talking about these two scholars of the entangled mind. So apparently, this is what we call in forest therapy, we call it an earth dreaming, the idea that ideas are coming out of this entangled mind, out of our relationship with the earth, with each other, with the plants. They appear all over the world at the same time. This kind of simultaneous appearance of ideas and methods is itself an indicator of the existence of this entangled mind, in which relationships are like neurons within an expanded non-local mind. So the relationship I have with my forest where I guide back home is not separate from me, but is right now in this moment a part of my intelligence. Does that make sense? And So your love for any particular plant or person or place is a part of a brain in which you live. This is awkward language. It's not exactly right. It's like using the language that we have to try to express the language that is trying to come into being. What if diversity and quantity, fluidity, reciprocity are foundations of intelligence in the entangled mind? What I'm saying here is that the more different kinds of species and peoples and places you're in relationship with, the greater your entangled intelligence will be. Does that make sense? What if the entangled mind is the one that knows how we should live? I'm getting flagged back there. My friends always say, don't ask him a question. He said, go on and on, right? But this to me is, this comes back to for me, to the reason why I'm doing the work I'm doing. And I believe the reason why the other speakers are doing the work they're doing, and why so many of us are drawn to this, because we're looking for what is the mind that is wise enough and connected enough and powerful enough and creative enough to be truly sustainable. And sustainable is not a strong enough word. To really hold our right place in the family of things. And perhaps this notion of the entangled mind is a pointer to that. I wonder if you can think of how other than human beings are a part of the neural network of your entangled mind right now. If you can think of that. I wonder if you can think of animals or plants that you're obviously close to, or places. And if you can think of it, the way I think of it is I feel it like there's a infinitely elastic cord going from my heart to the heart of that being. Doesn't matter where I am in the world, it's always there. And there's a huge web of them. And a lot of my life and work has been about cultivating that web in myself and in others. I'd like you to think of that web right now. If you're here with a friend right now, to feel that connection between your heart and the heart of your friend. And to maybe feel it with some of the other than human beings who you're in relationship with. Our guides are going down now to get ready to guide you on this. They're going to give you a series of invitations, but I want to talk about just a couple that you might try for befriending plants. Just to practice this. It's like it's a practice that can grow as you work with it. You know, I'm thinking of my friend Kath Lim, she's a guide in Singapore, one of our guides in Singapore, and she was we get a lot of people who come to us from the corporate world where they've been totally burned out and they're looking for a new way to live, and they train to be guides. And Kath, when I first met her, she told me this story. She said, we were sharing, and she just said, I hate birds. I'm like, okay, tell me more about that. Well, there's this one little bird that flew out of the nest too early and landed on my porch and couldn't take care of itself. I was so mad. And she spins this whole story of how she resentfully takes this bird and learns how to care for it and how it needs to be fed every 15 minutes. And in her job as a consultant, she has to take it into the conference rooms with her, and she has to take, what does she call it? She had to take mommy breaks every 15 minutes. And then she resentfully tells me about how hard it was for her to let the bird go, and how, by now it's Boo Boo, how hard it was to let Boo Boo go. And then she says, would you like to see a video? Yes. The video is titled, Boo Boo Comes Home. And it's 2 days after Boo Boo got let go, and it's a video she made with her phone, and it's got all these little hearts and sparkles and background music. She said, yeah, I hate birds, right? Anyway, I love Kath. So Kath said she decided to open a little store that was like a little plant store for people to buy. And she had always killed all of her plants. She said, plants hate me. She'd always killed all of them. And for the first few months in that store, she was killing them all. And she had to think about it differently. And she realized that she needed to get to know each individual plant as an individual and to listen to it and let it guide her in what it needed. So she learned this listening that involved feeling it, looking at its leaves, feeling the soil, being in a relationship. And soon her plants all began to thrive. But more than her plants thriving, her way of being in relationship thrived. So one invitation for befriending a plant is get yourself a house plant if you don't have one, and ask it to teach you what it needs from you in order to thrive. This is an invitation from Kath Lim in Singapore. Another invitation that we often give on forest walks, and I don't know if the guides are going to give it today, but we just say, we'll say this in different ways. The simplest way is to befriend a tree. Allow yourself to be drawn to a tree and do whatever makes sense to you to make friends with that tree. Allow your imagination to guide you. Personally, I talk to trees. I feel like there's a power in using my voice, not just talking internally, but speaking to them. There's the power of the spoken word. I do a thing before I guide. Every time before I guide, I show up early and I walk on my trail and I do what's called a greeting walk. Hello, trail. How are you this morning? I'm so happy to see you. Oh, old man Willow, look at you. Your leaves are pretty yellow here. It's the seasonal change, isn't it? Yeah, I feel that too. I feel that in my body. You know, and I just walk the trail and do that. You know what happens when you do that? The next time you show up at the trail, they're all leaning in to listen. They're all waiting for you. They're happy to see you. Oh, red flag. How long has that been up there? Like 10 minutes? Does this mean question and answer? Oh, well, look, I have one more slide, just my name. Perfect timing.
I'd like to take 2 questions.
Make them good ones. No pressure. No, really. Another thing, don't get me started. Give a minute. Someone will have a question. Here we go. Yay.
Can you direct us as to how to become a guide for a forest baby?
Oh, yeah. The website, the simple URL is nftg.org. And I guess I don't have a slide that says that. But the company is Association of Nature and Forest Therapy Guides and Programs. I, too, have some cards over there. So you can grab one of those. We'll probably have, in 2020, we'll have about 20 trainings. The group size is usually 20 people. We have trainers in, I think, 5 countries now, and about half the trainings and half of the guides are in the United States. So I know we have a couple here on the East Coast soon. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's a 6-month training. You start with a week-long intensive, then you do a 6-month mentored practicum, and we just feed you a lot of support, encouragement that whole time. Yes, another question back there. Did I say hand up? Yes, back there. Hmm? It's not online. There's a practicum curriculum, and you have a mentor, and you work with what we call a pod, which is 2 or 3 other people from your cohort, and you work together with the guidance of the mentor, and also with participation in the global community through like regularly scheduled, what would we call them? They're not podcasts. They're like Zoom meetings. where different of our staff will present on different topics. And there's just an awful lot of support the cohorts and other guides give each other. Yeah. No, people move around, do all kinds of stuff. The only time we gather together as a cohort is for the initial week-long intensive, but we also have this phenomenon where, like, I show up here in New York City and we got a whole passel of guides from a bunch of different cohorts, about half of whom I haven't met before, and they have such a sense of community. I didn't predict that when this started. There's a global community of people who feel that sense of community and who really support each other. Yeah, I will say this, just kind of truth in advertising, don't go and get trained in this thinking you're going to get a full-time job, because one of the things that I've been very aware of from the beginning is we are inventing from scratch a new job category that people have not yet wrapped their heads around, nor do they know how to value it. And one of the biggest questions we get, most frequent questions, is why do I need a guide, right? Because I can go walk in the woods. And my answer to that is we use yoga analogy a lot. Say, okay, you can also watch a video on yoga, get some nice yoga clothes, and you can learn yoga. You could even learn yoga from someone who's watched the videos. But you're going to have a much different experience if you're with a qualified teacher who can help you get started. So my recommendation to most people is go 3 times with a guide, and then see if that works for you. Yeah. So that's that. I feel the hook here. Are you about to pull me off the stage? One more. Okay. You know that feeling? You can just kind of feel the hooks there. Yeah.
Whoa. What do you think about the concept of the Anthropocene? Do you think it's too centered on humans as just one species, or is it good for, like, drawing attention to how much of an impact humans are having on the planet?
Yeah, as I understand, that's just the concept, is that we have changed the planet at the level of geology. And so presumably if there are geologists 500,000 years from now, they'll find a layer that's characterized by what we've done. This mountaintop was removed. There's this huge silt field that was where a river was dammed. There's this, layer of plastic covering the whole planet about this big, whatever, So that's what I think. It's an interesting and seems to be a legit concept. Yeah, we have managed. What an incredible species we are, right? Think of the power and beauty of humanity. Oh my God, we are so beautiful and intelligent that we can change the geology of an entire planet. Now let's do it with some wisdom, right? What's going to be next after the Anthropocene? Maybe it'll be the beauty scene. I don't know. That's what I'd like to see. Yeah. Okay. Is that it? I'm out of time? Yep. All right. Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate your being patient and listening to me. It's really an honor to speak to you. I hope it was helpful.
All right, everyone. This brings our Hort Symposium to a close. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you to all of our wonderful speakers and participants. We hope that everyone here has enjoyed hearing from the participants and are inspired to keep this discussion going. We're now all going to head down to the park, hopefully all of you, to experience forest bathing for ourselves. We're going to be meeting at the Eternal Light Monument, which is right there at 24th Street on 5th Avenue. And just please remember, too, if you're seeking ASLA credits, please see the check-in desk again so that you can sign out and receive those credits. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the park.